Hello and welcome to the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michaela, and today I have a New Year special for you. For this episode, I wanted to share the 5 best interviews of 2022. It was really a hard choice because I had so many awesome guests. The criteria for selection was the number of downloads, which is a little bit unfair to the folks that were released in Q4. But on the other hand, it gives us all the opportunity to listen to some of the episodes you might already have forgotten, or maybe you have missed it. So let me resurface some of them, remind you of them, and give you a little sampling, a little segment into the episode that hopefully sparks your interest and you go back and listen to the whole episode. But now, without further ado, let's start with Alvaro Trigo, who once was a web developer, but could quit his day job to work on open source software Fullpage.js. He started Fullpage.js as a side hustle, inspired by a task that he got from his boss. His boss asked him to build a website that looked like a PowerPoint presentation. After some research, he realized this does actually not exist and started to build it in his free time. First, it was just an open source project. He didn't get any money for it. But then things changed.
Well, at first, I couldn't even imagine that I was like somebody would be able to live out from these kind of things. So I guess this came naturally to me. I was working on it for free for 3 years under the MIT license, and at some point you start getting a bit. You have to take decisions like, should I keep on improving this, or should I just go for a barbecue with my friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or should I spend extra hours doing this after work, or should I just chill with my housemates or my friends or whatever? So, at the beginning, it's very exciting. You get people using it, and that excites you a lot, and then provides you some help to keep on improving it. But at some point, you start having to work on it when you don't actually feel like working on it, right? Because people keeps on requesting new features, or they have bugs, very specific bugs that almost look like you are doing free consultants services for them, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I thought, well, maybe I can try to get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I got motivated by another developer. It's called, I don't know how to pronounce it either. I think it's Desandro. He
Mm-hmm.
created Flickity, Mansory, and other popular JavaScript components. He was providing licenses for them, paid licenses. So I went into those. I read a bit how he was doing, and then I thought that I could do it as well. And that's when I started charging not for the product itself, but for paid extensions to the plugin.
Okay.
So they were non-open source extensions that I was selling on top of the open source project.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
So that's how it started, and then I saw people start buying them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what motivated me to keep on going. And then I noticed that I was feeling better about it all. Like if somebody reported a bug or wanted a new feature or whatever, then I wouldn't be so bothered about it because now I knew I was getting something in return. So I think this way it works a bit better. Like when you can take the time to do something and you get compensated for that, then you don't feel as bad because you can, you are not just wasting your free time. You're actually doing something in your work time, I guess, and that's a win-win for both sides, for the developer and for the users who get better support, better features, better response times. So I started selling the licenses, the extensions, and then after 6 months of doing that, I was able to quit my job.
Okay.
And
cool.
then after a year or so is when I decided to also change the whole project to another license and try charging for the license itself for commercial use,
Yeah.
for non-open source projects.
Yeah, I think that it's really, really important that, projects, that they are sustainable, especially if you have some success with it, right? Because there is more and more time that you are spending on it. And I think that, nobody, like if it's a hobby and you're spending 1 or 2 hours per week or something, this idea doesn't come up, right? But if it gets, as you said, if you have more users, you're getting more requests, you're getting more ideas maybe for features, so you're spending more and more time, and obviously I mean, we all have to live somehow,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Obviously, you have to think a little bit about how can I actually, make that maybe my job. And I think especially if you like something, that would be like a win-win, right? So
Hmm.
I can totally understand that. Another question that I had for you, when you were turning that around, I saw you had really big names. You have big names on your website
Mm.
for companies that are using Fullpage.js, right? There was like Google, eBay, Coca-Cola, Sony, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Did they all purchase a commercial license? And did you reach out to them when you changed your licensing model and your monetization idea around that? Did you reach out to them and say, you can
Hmm.
actually buy
Uh,
now license for that? Or
so some of them are using my license. That's how I managed to discover their website. Because when you use a license for when you buy an extension, you have to register it for a specific domain.
Mhm.
Extensions have a different price depending on how many domains you want to use the extension for. That's how I discovered some of them.
Mhm.
Others, I think I just discovered them by chance, and they might not be using a license.
Mhm.
So it depends. But no, I didn't reach. Well, I mean, when somebody buys an extension or a license for the product now, I get their email, and of course I get I get to notify them about updates or changes. So yeah, when I release a new version, I notified all of my previous customers and I told them about that. But if they were not previous customers, they didn't get a notification. So
Mhm.
if they were using the previous version, they can keep on using that forever, and nothing's gonna change in their site.
Okay. And so, what's preventing people from using the new version and not buying for a license?
Um, well, I guess some people might not know that there's a more recent version, and others, I guess, they're happy with their website and they don't want to touch it at all,
Hmm.
so they don't even want to bother to update to the latest version.
Okay.
Others, they might not want to pay. It's not very expensive though; it's quite cheap. But there's all kind of users, not only companies, but also freelancers or people who just make websites for fun, or
Hmm.
uh, you know. Um, so that might be one reason, because there's no other good reason to not update, because it's
Yeah.
totally compatible. You don't have to almost change anything in your code. I think it's just one line, if so. So yeah.
But my question was more: are there people that are updating and not paying if they use it commercially, or is that not possible? Do you have some prevention
Oh,
mechanisms around that? What I mean is that can I
cheat the
be a little
system.
bit, cheat your system.
Yeah, you totally can, and there's not much that we can do about that. I mean, yeah, for example, I discovered there was a McDonald's website in Russia making use of the new version of the plugin with the new license, and they were not paying for it. And there was a warning: if you open the JavaScript console, you were able to see a red warning say, "Hey, this software is not licensed. You can
Uh-huh.
get a license here." But there's not much that I can do about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can try to send, I think they're called DMCA notices to Google or to
Yeah.
some marketplaces to take down some of the
Take
stuff,
down
but it's
notices. Yeah.
I cannot be bothered
It's
for
a lot
just
of hassle,
ten
right? It's a lot
ten
of
dollars.
hassle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So you are more focused on directing your energy to creating more value for your users
Hmm.
and, doing what you like and not so much bothered with the thefts and,
Yeah, I mean,
trickeries and things like this.
I bother a little bit, but I try not to bother too much.
The second pick is also about entrepreneurship. Daniel Vassallo tells us all why he left his cushy job at Amazon, where he made over $500,000 per year, to start his own business. He also explains his philosophy of small bets, which means that he recommends to start building a lot of small different businesses instead of going all in on one big idea. Why is that? Well, he thinks that one big idea will take years to make it successful, but also, even worse, it could take years to realize it's not gonna work. So he has a selection criteria that helps him to pick the right opportunities and startup ideas for himself.
I tried to do a bunch of things at the same time. Small things, of course. I was realistic. I couldn't, I had limited, finite time like everyone. And that sort of changed my attitude to things. Instead of sort of focusing on one thing, I started looking around me and I started asking myself, what can I do? Low hanging fruit. That's what can I do that is a small thing, doesn't necessarily need to have large upsides, recurring revenue, or necessarily be sustainable for a long time. I was mostly looking at small wins. Right? What can I do? Something that can make me some money in 3 months' time with reasonably high odds. It's still unpredictable. You never really know whether something is going to work or not. Even today, right, when I launch new things, I have no clue sometimes whether things are going to work or not. But it changed my perspective because before I was looking at things, does this have upside? Is this going to scale? Is this sustainable? And I think the trade-off that comes with that, those things that do have those properties tend to have low odds of succeeding. Right? They just to be hard, unpredictable, sort of affected by random things, good timing, and other things that are very opaque. And this had worked out really well for me. So now to get back to your question, sort of the reason why now it looks like I have a very diverse portfolio of products is because the products are a manifestation of inspiration that I had over the last 2.5 years or so. And I ask myself, is this something that can be a small bet? Is this something that I can give it a shot? And maybe if it works, I keep it. If it doesn't, or if it becomes, too hard to do, or something that I'm disliking, I can just drop it. So it's been sort of a stream of experiments. Some things work, some things worked more than others, some things beyond my expectations, some things worked a little bit, but didn't meet my expectations. So as you can imagine, in a portfolio, it's like investments. I mean, I don't think the idea is that radical. We tend to do the same thing with how we invest our money. For example, that we almost consider it foolish to deploy all your life savings like in a single stock or a single asset, right? We tend to want to diversify to tame uncertainty. And I think more or less it's the same approach to my own ideas and my own small ventures, essentially.
Yeah.
So I know it's a general answer. Happy to dive deeper into all the individual things, but sort of that's the general idea that I think evolved over time.
I think when I look at your projects and your products, I think what's also distinctive here is that they have a start and an end. So a lot of people have a lot of ideas, but they are continuous, right? So I'm starting with it and I can actually not stop them, but it's more something that I'm doing, and I keep on getting busier and busier because I'm adding things to my portfolio, right? Let's say a SaaS business user base is probably the exception here, right? It's not something that you start and then it already ended. It has some maintenance cycle, as we all know with software, right? And if it gets more successful, you will have to be more involved. But like a cutting board has a start and the end, right? You have the idea, you design it, and then it's finished. And then maybe you have to sell it. Yeah, okay. But there's not really a lot of involvement in it. The same for the video course. You recorded it and now you're selling it. The same for the book, right? You start it, you finish it. So do you think that you deliberately think about that when you're looking at your small bets? I mean, there's like, as we have finitive time, we probably have infinitive ideas on what we can do. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. I'm struggling with that. What should we take on? And there's always a pros and cons list, or however people make the judgment. Is this a finitive thing of I'm starting this and, in 3 weeks or in 3 months, I have it finished and then I'm done with it, and so on? Is that something that crosses your mind, that you're thinking about it explicitly?
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of, I think I've developed a selection criteria, I like to call it. So it's sort of, I think back when I started, I almost fell into the trap of running into the first opportunity that I felt that I could do, and I would just jump into it. So I think because it seems like, okay, I can do it, let's do it. Nowadays, I've become much more rigorous, I would say, right, with my selection criteria. And I'm feeling completely okay at peace, ignoring things that I feel like I can do, I can give a shot. But if they don't satisfy my strict selection criteria, I just leave them, for someone else or whatever. Like, they're just not mine. And what you mentioned is an important part of it. That is, like, I ask myself, is this something that I like to call it, is this something where time is going to be my friend, not my enemy? I think what you're doing is you need to have the payoff happen before a certain period of time. Otherwise, you're going to run out of money or out of time or out of frustration or get demotivated. And I dislike that situation. I dislike that property. Right? So I try to avoid those as much as possible. I think with user base, I also made the mistake of what the kind of SaaS was. It's the kind of SaaS that requires, unfortunately, 24/7 support. I have a PagerDuty app, right? Sort of sometimes I get paged in the 2 a.m. in the morning. Like nowadays, I would almost certainly avoid something like that, right? I would go for something simpler, almost certainly. Other parts of my selection criteria are also, is this something that I can build and bring to market by myself? Not because I think I know everything or I can do everything, but I think it's a good test to keep things simple, right? It's sort of a proxy for, is this simple enough that I can bring it to market by myself? Like if I change my mind or I decide it's not worth pursuing anymore, I don't have to make sure that everyone is on board, or I'm not sort of hurting anyone else. Concerns go away if I keep things simple that I can sort of do on my own. I did with user base, right? I've invested so much that then I started falling into the trap of sunk costs. Now I should invest even more. And I ended up spending, a ton of time, money, and more than what my risk appetite really was, right? So definitely a lesson learned. And what you mentioned, right? I really liked projects and ideas that sort of ideally have a start and an end, where time is my friend.
So what are some of the products that you started, or the ideas that you started that haven't
Yes.
succeeded yet, or maybe that you haven't even shared with the, are there some that you haven't shared even with with the people in the public?
Absolutely. So there's the various difference of failure, degrees of failures as well. Certainly, I think worth mentioning user base is probably the biggest failure that I had. And this one, I did it before I was thinking about sort of the strategy, right? So I think it's a failure that led me to see things differently. But I almost feel embarrassed to say this, but I've spent almost $150,000 of my own savings building user base. It's crazy talking about it. And this is only making about $5,000 in annual revenue, not monthly, right? So almost certainly I will never recoup my money. Maybe I might try sell it in the future, but even there, I'm not expecting sort of large amounts. And I don't know if even that is an option. But as I mentioned before, I think my mistake was in the beginning underestimating uncertainty. I invested too much. I went all in. The more I went all in, the more I felt like I need to invest. And this was sort of this cycle of bad decisions. Putting that aside, however, there were a few other small things that I would not necessarily, they weren't big failures, but there were things that didn't really work as I expected. In fact, the very first digital product that I tried, not many people know about it, was I tried to sell a spreadsheet. This is a bit of a technical project. I started to sell a spreadsheet about benchmarking different EC2 servers, their network speeds. So back then, back in 2019, AWS didn't really advertise accurately what network speed you are getting and what network bandwidth you are getting when you are buying or using a particular instance type. I thought I'm going to run a benchmark test and measure exactly what type of performance you're going to get. I was building in public and talking about it. People were interested. And basically, long story short, I spent a week, wrote the tool, open sourced the tool, benchmarked everything, spent about $500. I did prepare a very sophisticated spreadsheet with pivot tables, very fancy spreadsheet. I was very proud of it. I posted it on Twitter, posted it on Hacker News, Reddit, and a few other places. There was lots of interest and attention. It actually surprised me. I think the sort of landing page got about 30,000 views, which was, even nowadays, that compared to my other products, it was a lot. But this sold nothing, right? I mean, nobody paid, and I was charging $10, like not like a crazy amount of money. Nobody bought it, right? And in fact, a few days later, I released it for free. And I think a lesson that I learned is back then, I remember thinking, wait a minute, back then it was 2019. I said 2019, information wants to be free. Nobody wants to pay for information, especially developers. But I think actually I'm happy that I didn't sort of take that lesson too seriously, because I jumped to the wrong conclusion now in hindsight. That it's not really true. In fact, I made a lot of money now selling information, different kinds of information, right? And sometimes even to developers, right? So that belief or that conclusion that developers don't pay for things. So in fact, I think a lesson that I learned with sort of these experiments is that sometimes we tend to jump to conclusions that are not warranted, right? That's why did this fail? Why were people not willing to pay for it? Maybe I can take some educated guesses. But nowadays, I try to be careful not to read too much from these things, because I know that things are affected by random things, by good timing and other unpredictable things that sometimes, whether something succeeds or not, is just things that we can't even see, right? It's just opaque things.
Yeah.
So that was another example. We mentioned the cutting boards. The cutting board started as purely as an experiment. I started woodworking just this time last year as a hobby. And at some point I was wondering, could I try to sell some of the things that I'm making? And eventually I bumped into the idea of wooden cutting boards. I launched the offering, I think in October of last year, so maybe 4 months ago. I sold about $5,000, not a big thing. Probably if I consider all the tools and everything, I might have just broken even. So it's still a failure in terms of expectation. Nevertheless, I still think that I gained something from the knowledge, because I did ship about a dozen around the world and learned a lot. But I think what's more important is that nowadays I feel less daunted by a physical product offering. So, you mentioned, for example, I have the profit and loss membership. That's another thing that was purely an experiment. I was so a bit of a background story. I also have this quarter time freelancing arrangement with Gumroad. Are you familiar with Gumroad? Is this platform for digital products? And back then, when I joined the team, we were launching a feature, memberships, like the ability to do recurring payments. And I wanted an excuse to try to use the feature, essentially. It was literally how it started. And I was wondering, what could I sell for a recurring fee? And I had already been very, very open with my finances for a long time on Twitter and in other places, with my business finances, at least, like with how things are doing. And I thought, what if I tried to sell an even more detailed financial view, like broken down by product, broken down with all the expenses and where the costs, basically the full profit and loss per product. And I started it, and when I started it, I was hoping that I could build like a community around these ideas of making money online and figuring out small bets and building a portfolio. I created a circle group. I was posting updates. So not only I was posting my financial results, but some commentary as well. Long story short, even though this financially, did okay, I did about $40,000 in total in about a year or so. I'm quite happy compared to the input I've put, but my goal of building a community didn't really happen. Right? It originally there was some momentum. I was getting lots of questions, but it never really changed from my talking about my own topic, and eventually things sort of stopped. The energy disappeared, and barely any activity continued to happen. Nevertheless, almost by surprise, recently my most recent project actually is a cohort-based course where we're meeting 25 members at a time. I launched this about 3 months ago or so, where we're having this asynchronous basically course that we meet together, a small group, and we talk about these ideas in much more detail that we're discussing here, finding inspiration, finding opportunities, juggling multiple things at the same time. And funny enough, even though it wasn't my intention, I set up a Discord server just for housekeeping purposes to share the Zoom links and the slides and whatever. And the community that I was hoping to build back then happened there now, purely by accident. This wasn't something I was almost trying to do, which is fascinating. And it the community almost became the main selling point of this course, almost. Like people are, word of mouth is spreading, there's about 100 people now, and people are encouraging others, come here, we're talking and getting good feedback and brainstorming ideas and things like that, which is, again, it's quite fascinating to me. Most of the things that have been successful, and even the failed things, but in particular the successful things, are things that I wouldn't have even imagined I'd be doing just a year ago or so. That was very, very interesting. I had the idea before. I used to believe, business success is going to be a self-directed, top-down. You come up with the idea and you execute it. And now it's almost, I throw myself at random things, see what works, throw away the rest, right? And it's very, very unpredictable.
Yeah.
So
the third pick in this year wrap-up is the episode with Dagna Bieda, who is a career coach for software developers. In this episode, she explains how you can fast-track your engineering career and what mindset has to do with your professional growth.
But what I really am passionate about and what I really love to focus on is that mindset piece, right? Like, what kind of blind spots do you have? What kind of limiting beliefs do you have? I actually like to say that I moved from programming computers to reprogramming human minds, and it really beautifully describes what it is that I do. Because once you change your mindset, I'll put it this way: how you think is how you act, and how you act is the results that you're getting then from the reality, the real world. And a lot of my clients achieve spectacular results once we figure out those limiting beliefs and get past them.
Yeah, can you tell me some limiting beliefs? I also regularly reflect on mine, and right now, I'm also in this state where I think because of the pregnancy and the very new birth, I think this is such an inward facing period in my life again, right? Where I'm thinking like, okay, what are the beliefs that I have and that are holding me back, and so on. So yeah, I would be really curious. Can you give some examples of beliefs that software engineers have? Maybe that you have seen patterns.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that hold them
There
back.
are two that are super common and super popular. Number
Mm-hmm.
one is believing that your work speaks for itself, which it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. It does not. Like, okay, if someone else works on the same code base with you and they can look at your code, they could see the value that you bring to the table if they put in the work and effort to actually go into the code, look up what it is that you committed, and have some thoughts on that. But in order to be successful in an engineer's role, what you really have to do is market yourself. You have to talk about your achievements and accomplishments, and not expect for everybody in the company just know what it is that you're doing, because people just don't know. They have their own work that they're prioritizing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very critical to figure out if you have that limiting belief of work speaks for itself, because again, it doesn't, and that keeps a lot of talented engineers stuck in their career. That's number one. The second one, which always cracks me up, but I used to think that way too. There was a moment, and I have to be honest with you, there was a moment I thought the same way. And the second limiting belief is essentially that you are surrounded as an engineer with idiots that just don't want to listen to your amazing ideas. And here's the thing: whenever as an engineer you have an incredible idea and you want to pitch it, you want to get people on board, it's super important for you to communicate about it in a certain way. You have to be able to negotiate, you have to be able to like really describe it, but describe it in terms of the priorities of your stakeholders, right? So if I'm going to, and I'm guilty of that as well, like there was this two projects that I worked on in my most recent engineering job, and I was responsible for taking care of a mobile app, and it was a pain in the butt that the build of the app was taking a few minutes, and I just felt it was so inefficient. So I went ahead and I refactored how this particular app was built, and I reduced the build time from few minutes to like 30 seconds. And I was so proud of myself, I was so like, yes, this is amazing. In reality, what happened is that what I did, that work that I did, impacted my life and one other engineer. Nobody else cared. It didn't matter. Then I had a second task or project that I worked on in the same company, which was creating a deliverable for a client. Super boring, a lot of copy and pasting, a lot of like following steps. I did not enjoy doing that at all. But guess what? Whenever it was deployed and the client could spread the mobile app to their own client base, I got praise from the sales representative, from our BA, from the project manager. My tech lead was like, "Wow, Dagna, that was super fast turnaround." Everybody across the organization was like, "Yay, success!" And I'm thinking to myself, "Wow, I would have never in 100 million years figured this out on my own. If you ask me as an engineer to like put a value on this project versus that project, I would have thought that the refactoring was better." So here's a long story, but essentially what I'm trying to say is it's very important to understand what you're doing trickles, like how what you're doing fits into the business as a whole, the business that you're working for, and how to communicate about it. That's
Yeah.
really the key of what I was trying to say here.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. But I also found myself working at companies where you are assigned things, right? So you're not really asked for your opinion if this is now really helpful or not, or something like this. And then maybe reassigned as well, right? Which I think there are several impacts to that. First of all, what would be your advice for people that are assigned projects where they also know maybe it doesn't look like this has a big impact on the company, right? So it's also limiting my ability to advance my career here. What should you do? How do you communicate about that? What's your advice?
Yeah, we're kind of going back to to that communication piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, one thing that I want to share, the assumption I'm coming here up with is that whoever assigns you that work is not a mind reader. So they would not necessarily have your priorities, your career priorities in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to whenever you're asking for work, to kind of like be proactive and say, hey, I am really working towards becoming, let's say, a staff engineer, becoming a team lead, becoming an engineering manager. Can you help me out and assign the kind of work to me that will help me achieve that goal, right? Asking for that help and support, because and most of us are nice and friendly people, and we want to help, but we don't always know what's the best way to provide that help. So being kind of like your own advocate, and talking about what it is that you want to do is really critical here. A second thing is, whenever you're in those one-on-ones with your manager, is to really ask for feedback. How are you doing? How you could be doing better, and creating that safe space for feedback. Something that is my strength actually, and really helped me with accelerating in my career early on, was that relentlessness in asking for feedback. Like, I had this team lead that worked with me that helped me become a senior engineer because he kind of vouched for me in the meetings that I wasn't part of. And he really said, like, hey, she's ready. She can handle it. She can be a senior engineer. I think she's ready. And that's what got me the promotion. But when him and I worked together, I was telling him, look, I really want to know. Don't worry, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I want to advance. I want to be hitting the ground running, and I want to really work on the things that are holding me back. And one of the critical pieces of feedback that he initially didn't want to give me because it felt like maybe he would hurt my feelings, or maybe it was too much, I don't know. But after I was pushing and pushing for that feedback, he essentially told me, Dagna, fast is great, but reliable is better. And
Mm-hmm.
that advice changed how I was thinking about writing code, because I was really prioritizing being fast, delivering as soon as possible, right? But sometimes my fast solutions were not fully thought out. And a senior engineer really has to have that understanding of how the engineering decisions impact business, the team, and what it is that they're trying to accomplish as a
Mm-hmm.
team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking back of a time, right, where I think it's totally true that we have to go and advocate for ourselves. But I also wonder how many people are a little bit stuck in that, well, this is what the business needs, right? I understand that you want to advance your career, you want to become, a senior engineer or a tech lead or whatnot. Um, and saying that the project doesn't seem to have such big impact, right? And big impact, I think, has to do with the stakeholder. Who is it visible to, right? Who is going to see and hear your name, and so on. So I think there's a little bit a political background towards that as well. Have you worked with people that are just really stuck in a situation where there is There is nobody that really advocates for them too much, or they are assigned a project that's low visibility and they're stuck there. Would you say the best is to move companies, or
The short and sweet answer is yes. And in the very first meeting that I have with my clients, whenever we start our coaching sessions in the program, what we do is we figure out what are their specific life and career goals and what are their values and how their current workplace supports those values. And then we measure them in a specific way. And after that specific exercise, we're able to confidently say whether it's worth staying in that place or if it's time to move on.
The fourth pick is one of the most listened episodes of 2022. It is the episode with Mauricio Aniche, where he explains how to write tests that find bugs. In this episode, he explains what domain-driven testing is and also how we can use coverage reports to find bugs. So when you say systematic and, that we have to learn it, I'm thinking back at university, and the first thing that pops into my mind is fuzzy testing and, and maybe verification and all of that, which, is scary, and a lot of developers don't do it. And maybe it's not that practical. It's not that scalable. Are we talking about those kind of things, or are we more thinking about edge cases, for example? And what is exactly the systematic way to write test cases? Is it hard?
It is not, and I think it's closer to the thinking of edge cases, as you mentioned. So really close to the way developers write tests nowadays. So it's not a big jump from what you're doing now to what I'm trying to propose in the book. And so think of, you have this method to test. This method receives 2 or 3 parameters. My book basically says, look to the first parameter. What is it? Is it an integer? Is it a string? If it's an integer, maybe you have these cases to think about. Then go to the second parameter, go to the third parameter, then try to see how those 3 parameters interact together. So it's, again, super similar to the unit test you write, but now in a more systematic way.
So is it a little bit like a checklist? For me, that sounds like a checklist, or, even it's code reviews. We know that the most effective code reviewers are actually the ones that have a checklist, right? Even if they are experienced developers, because it helps your brain to go systematically through the code and think about, oh, did I think about this, about that? Yeah. And normally people don't even read the code review checklist anymore. They just look at it and, oh, I forgot actually about, that part over here. Can I think about it that way?
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, at some moment when I was writing the book, I considered a lot creating a checklist where people could, just try to follow. And these ideas are not fully mine, right? So I learned a lot from what is in there. And so the domain testing techniques that are there, maybe super popular in academia, a bit less popular in industry, they are doing these checklists without calling them checklists, right? Yeah.
In the book, you describe quite a few different types of testing, right? Domain testing, which I would really briefly describe as breaking down the requirements, right? So what the program should do and looking at that. Then you talk about structural testing, which is looking at the code coverage. Then you talk about example-based testing, property-based testing, and you talk about contracts. Can you explain each one of those a little bit more in detail? And maybe the first one is, what is the most important one? Do we have to know all this kind of different testing types, or is it enough if I, do domain testing? Are they exclusive, or how do they integrate with each other?
Yeah, good question. I think, if you're a busy person and you cannot read all the chapters, if you read the domain testing one and then the structural testing one, you kind of grasp the main ideas there. And my suggestion is usually you implemented some feature, right? I'm not really focusing on test-driven development here. So just imagine you wrote your feature. Maybe you did test-driven development, maybe not. And now it's time that, for systematic testing. You want to explore all the possible edge cases to look for bugs. My first suggestion is for you to do domain testing, meaning you look at the requirements, you know what the program needs to do, and this is the requirements. It doesn't have to be UML or a user story, whatever you like. And then you systematically apply domain testing techniques there to come up with test cases. So, those are the inputs of my program. These are the outputs of my program. Let's explore them. After you do this, you create lots of test cases. Are you done? Almost. The next step is, let's now look at the source code and try to get some hints from the source code. Because sometimes there are small differences between what you envision the program to do and how you implement it, right? Maybe, I don't know, you're doing some crazy optimization there that requires some extra testing, whatever. And then you look at the source code, maybe you use some code coverage tool to help you on doing this. And you then augment the test suites you created with domain testing. And this is kind of the main loop that I see when it comes to create test cases. Then, of course, after that, my book dives into different techniques you can do to make your tests better, like property-based testing, design by contracts, so on and so forth. But the two techniques are the ones that I consider core for someone that wants to create good tests.
So domain testing, I have to see a little bit as it's not black box testing, because I know the code, but it's a little bit more about the use cases, right? So maybe I'm looking at the Jira ticket, or some story in on GitHub or something, and I'm reading down what this code change actually should do, and then I'm developing my test for that. And then I should complement that with structural testing, where I actually go at the code and see, how is that actually implemented. And because code coverage for me would be not only about how is that implemented, but also like line coverage. Do I hit every line, even, the exception, and, if there's a switch statement, do I go through each of the cases and so on, right? Is that, and then I go back to domain testing again, what should this actually do, and loop through that?
That's a super good point, and I think this is one of the things my book does differently from the others, and I'm super curious to see how the community will react. So when we talk about domain testing, we usually have this black box perspective where we don't care so much about the implementation. What I'm trying to say in my book is that maybe you can use those same techniques, but now looking at small units that you kind of know how they work. You don't have to test a whole program using domain testing. Why not also applying the same things for a small method or a class? And of course, you can then start and going up in the test level. So maybe you test the unit using these, and then you're satisfied. Then you go a little bit bigger and you test the whole component using domain testing. Why not? So I discuss the different test levels as well in the book. But so I want to first thing convince people that domain testing can be done at any levels. Those techniques apply there as well. That is the first thing. And then the second thing is about code coverage, because there we're then usually focused on unit testing. And I also want to say that maybe it can help you in other levels as well. But I think the main difference from what I'm seeing there is that code coverage for me is not there for us to see a number. And, did we reach our magical number code coverage for the CI to pass? No, it's more like it's a tool to augment the tests you created using domain testing. So they don't care about the number anymore. You care about looking at a line that is not covered and reflecting about it. If in the end you achieve 100%, I don't care. I just care that you reflected about things you didn't test.
Okay.
You know what I
And
mean?
so, yeah, I know what you mean. But so one of the biggest criticisms for code coverage is that we are counting, or most of the programs actually look at, has this code been executed or not? But we are not looking for, assertions, for example, or like preconditions, postconditions. So for me, they always go hand in hand somehow, right? So when I think about testing, and especially if I hear code coverage and coverage reports and this number, right? The question is always, okay, well, did I hit every line? But did I even check, what's happening here? Or did I just execute the program, right? Because, well, if a smoke test could also execute a lot of the code base, but actually just make sure that the code runs somehow without verifying that the inputs and outputs are matching and so on. What's your take on that, and what is your advice? Is it something that that you talk about in your book and that developers should be worried about?
No, I think that's common sense in industry. A lot of developers really hate code coverage. And in fact, I have an entire section on the book called something like "Why Do Developers Hate Coverage?" Something like that. And to me, I think if you're looking at code coverage as a number only, and then you decide whether you should go up or down, that's not useful, right? Because the number hides a lot of information. So for me, the first way you should use code coverage is to, again, augment the test cases you created before. So your test should always come from requirements, because You should test what the program should do, of course, and then code coverage as a way to augment your test cases. And if you're using this tool to see if you missed a test case, then code coverage becomes always relevant, right? Because you're not only looking at did I cover this or not, but it's more like I didn't cover this line. Why is that? Why did I miss this test when I was looking at the requirements, right? So it's more of a reflection exercise, in my opinion. This doesn't mean, though, that the number is completely useless. I like the code coverage number to give you an overall impression of how tested your system is, because achieving 100% coverage doesn't mean much because you still can have bad tests. But having like 10% code coverage means something. It means you're not really testing anything there. So if you're there to prioritize where to start your testing process right now, say you're in a legacy without tests, the code coverage can be a nice guidance for you. So that is the tip. Don't use code coverage as a number that you blindly try to achieve. That's not going to work for you.
The final episode that made it into the 2022 top 5 picks is the episode where Nuchals Dular shared why the engineering manager position he worked for at GitLab wasn't really meant for him. He thought that he would enjoy being an engineering manager. He found himself drained by all the meeting requests and he missed coding. After this episode, quite a few people reached out to me and shared that they either went through the same or that they are also looking for a way to go back to software engineering. Let's listen in.
In the beginning, there were so many things I had to learn. So I was completely focusing on that. And after some time, like 8 or 9 months, like there's definitely enough things I could have learned. But I then was able to more focus on like, how am I as a manager? Like, what do I like about this job? I was able to step back once again and evaluate. And the first weeks were like super exciting and overwhelming. And as I said, like it's a different job. You jump between projects. You need to learn to delegate, be better at communication. And what I noticed though, I'm like, this is one of the things. So I'm more of an introvert, and I like I can sit on a screen for 10 hours and debug a bug and fix it, and I'm happy. Mm-hmm. But as an engineer at GitLab, we maybe have like 1 to 2 hours of meetings per week, which is amazing. It allows you like to have enough async time and like deeply focused time. But as a manager, you mostly spend your time in meetings. So I had one-on-ones, I had 8 direct reports. So I was in meetings for 10 to 14 hours. And this sounds maybe even like not many hours for other managers, but for me, it was a lot as an introvert. Mm-hmm. So this drained me. It was Wednesday and I was already drained for this whole week because of these meetings. And so that was definitely the one factor for me. And another one is this emotional burden, actually. Like burden is maybe the wrong word here, but it costs more emotional time for myself. Small things happen, like a direct report tells you something and you somehow have this emotional part that you want to deal with, or you also have maybe interviewing someone and reject a candidate. And this was hard for me. And so it cost me emotional energy all the day long. And I'm just not the right person for this, it seems. And one of the things I talked to another back then interim manager. She's amazing. And so we talked with each other and she was telling me like, yeah, one-on-ones are the best things of my day. And I get so energized by that. And I was there after my 3rd day of one-on-ones and said like, I can't anymore. I can't do this, robbing me so much energy. Although I like talking with people and like all of them, it's just harder for me. So I saw, okay, maybe I'm not the right person for this job. They are definitely the right person, but I'm not, because I don't get energized by it. It costs me more energy than I get from it. Yeah.
I think it's really important to feel your own energy level, right? Not being, taken away by what I'm supposed to do, or, people are supposed to get a manager role, and it's a next step up in your career, and then you're overlooking that you're actually not feeling really good about it, right? I think this is really it's probably a problem that a lot of people have, or a mistake that a lot of people do, right? That they feel like, oh, this is so important, and I have this nice title, and shiny, and maybe, I don't know, maybe more salary if you are a manager, right?
Yeah, exactly. And After stepping back, I really noticed I don't care too much about the title anymore. I mean, I also would say that at GitLab the title is not so super important. You can influence and change things, even though like you maybe a junior or intermediate engineer. It doesn't really matter. Like as long like what the content matters a lot, and so that was no advantage there in that sense. And I then stepped back and was thinking, do I want to become a staff engineer now? And my answer was initially, well, if I get to it, maybe, but it's not what I need to have. I don't need staff title now. I'm just happy to work on something that I care about, and that's it. That's my goal. Actually, it's not the title itself. So I learned this as well after stepping back. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's very natural. When I was at university, I also always dreamt of this, career and going up the corporate ladder and all these titles. And it seemed as something that we should strive for, like also the marks that we get in school, right? You want the one, or an A in another country and so on, right? And not a B and so on. And so it also seemed for me that this is important. And over the time I realized actually it's not that important, right? It's important if you are energized by what you're doing, if you feel good, and then you're getting also better at it, right? Because if it's taking your energy, you can spend a lot of energy, but because you're not getting it back, it's not it's not sustainable. Let's put it that way. That's
Absolutely, I fully agree. It's mostly about energy management, not about time management or something. And I then also was thinking, what is the actual career progression? So I already didn't enjoy like being a manager too much. Like, what would be the next step? Maybe senior manager or director. And I didn't see myself at all in this position. It's even more stress. I don't know how does everyone, like even managers, do it. Like how they can deal with it. As I said, like I'm the wrong person for this job. Although like I, at least to save myself a bit, like I got good feedback. People seem to like me as a manager, and I hopefully did great work, at least based on the feedback. But I also didn't enjoy it. And then I saw also you can do good work, but it doesn't matter really. It matters like how you feel. And yeah, so looking back at the engineering progression as an IC, okay, maybe I could go to staff. Maybe there's something above there, but I don't care too much on one side. But on the other side, if I would be able to get there, it's fine. Like I see this is still an individual contributor role. It's a different job. So I saw like, okay, career progression wise, it's okay to go this ladder instead of the other.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying about it doesn't matter so much how good you are at what you're doing, but it's also important how you feel, right? I was working in a nursing home when I was still back in school during the summer break, and I believe that I was really, really nice to the people and I did a really good job there, but it was just breaking me. I was sad every day. It was emotionally so draining. And I probably was one of the nicest nurses there, right? And maybe did the best job, but I wasn't able to do it. And I always got sick. I always got sick,
wow.
really, really sick, like high fever. So like the body telling me, you can't go in there anymore. It's like, it's too depressing and too. And so, yeah, as you're saying, it doesn't mean that if you're not doing your manager job, that you are not good at it. It just means that it wasn't the right thing for you in that time. And I think that it can maybe change also over time if it's due to external factors, maybe, right? Maybe you're not right now not in the right place to do something, right? And this could be not only a manager or individual contributor role, but something else maybe, right? Where you have to travel, right? Let's say traveling is part of your job, then sometimes it could be that this is the right thing for you to do. I enjoy traveling a lot, a couple of years back. And right now, I at one point I was also sick a little bit of traveling, like being in these hotel rooms alone. And then there comes a new time and you think like, now traveling could be, something that I enjoy again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I also want to come back to something that you were talking about. And this is, first I was so occupied with learning, these new skills and what I have to do and so on. I think this is also extremely valuable, that it's not from day one that you know something, but you have to grow into that role. And then you were saying, I took a step back, I think this is so important, right? So how was that exactly for you?
It took vacation to get to this step actually. Yeah, in the beginning, I'm so grateful for the team. I started in this team. I knew nothing about the technology, anything, and I just observed. I asked them in the second week, I made a 3-page long questionnaire for the team. Like, hey, how is this actually working? And it was actually nice because this is the initial effect you have. You have no idea, and I like being naive. I like being asking these naive questions because I later, like half a year later, saw my questions were leading to something where we maybe should work on. Yeah, and so after half a year or something, and I took a longer break, like a 2-week vacation, and then I saw this immediate like stress relief, and I was then like clearly seeing also with my partner, okay, I'm feeling much better and happier now that I'm away a bit from the stress. I maybe I should rethink, but at this point I was still thinking, but that's what I always wanted. Like last 10 years I was always, okay, I'll go for management at some point. And breaking this mindset was tough for me, but I also saw it made me much more happier now and relieved after stepping back. And back then when I went for the promotion, I still saw I have this impact. Like I can help others. I can see them grow. I can help the team to work better, maybe, hopefully. And I saw like, okay, while I'm suffering somehow as I'm stressed, I also see like how much more impact I can have and how the nice parts of the roles are. And so I was still going for it because I liked it.
My New Year's resolution for 23 is to really grow the podcast and make it more special and even better for you. And it would mean the world to me if you could help me with that. Go ahead and send the episode to a friend if you enjoyed it. You can also rate it on iTunes, for example, on Spotify. If you haven't subscribed and you listen to it, then why not subscribe to it and make sure that you really get it into your podcasting app regularly. If you have seen it, I'm now uploading also all the videos to YouTube, and so you can see me and my guests really during the conversation. I think that's also quite a nice format. And I redid the website. So I put a lot of effort, as you can see, into the podcast and the surrounding of it so that you get really a lot of value of it. And there's also a transcript for each of the podcasts that you can find on the website. Yeah, so if you enjoy my show, please help me spread the word. Send it to a friend, send it to a colleague, rate it on iTunes, rate it on Spotify. This helps me so much, and it's really also the best support for me to be able to focus on the podcast and put a lot of work and effort into making it the best podcast that I can do. And I would also love to know, what is your New Year's resolution? What is your big plan for 2023? Tell me maybe on Twitter. Okay, bye. I hope you enjoyed another episode of the Software Engineering Unlocked podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Bye.